The wedding music stopped so suddenly that even the birds seemed to fall silent. Every smiling face turned toward the flashing red and blue lights pulling onto the quiet suburban street, and the bride's hands began to tremble around the bouquet she had spent months dreaming of carrying. One angry phone call had shattered what should have been the happiest afternoon of two people's lives. Imagine standing beside the person you love, surrounded by your family, only to watch strangers arrive as if your celebration were a crime. What would you do if someone judged you before even knowing your heart? Marcus had spent most of his life proving himself to people who had already decided who he was. Growing up in Georgia before building a career in Ohio, he had learned to smile through suspicious looks, unfair assumptions, and quiet insults that left invisible scars. His fiancée, Rachel, had witnessed many of those moments. She loved him, not because he was strong enough to survive them, but because he never allowed bitterness to replace kindness. They had planned a simple outdoor wedding in a peaceful American neighborhood where Rachel's late grandmother had once lived. It was never meant to be extravagant. They wanted laughter, homemade food, folding chairs beneath old oak trees, children chasing bubbles, and families becoming one. After years of hard work and sacrifice, this day represented hope more than perfection. As guests gathered beneath strings of white lights, neighbors peeked through windows and over fences. Most smiled politely, but one elderly homeowner named Walter stood on his porch with folded arms. He watched every arriving guest as though measuring whether they belonged. The music, the joyful conversations, and the growing crowd seemed to irritate him more with every passing minute. Instead of introducing himself or asking questions, he called the police. He claimed there was a dangerous disturbance, that unfamiliar people had taken over the street, and that he feared for the neighborhood. His words carried assumptions that reached far beyond noise complaints. They carried prejudice. Within minutes, patrol cars rolled toward the ceremony. The bride's young nieces stopped tossing flower petals. Elderly relatives slowly stood from their chairs. Parents instinctively moved closer to their children. For several painful seconds, nobody knew what was happening. Some guests lowered their heads because they had experienced moments like this before. Others looked confused, wondering how a wedding could suddenly become the subject of police attention. Rachel squeezed Marcus's hand so tightly she feared she might hurt him, but she could feel him breathing slowly, refusing to let panic control him. The officers stepped out professionally, expecting to calm a reported emergency. Instead, they found a peaceful gathering filled with music, laughter that had suddenly disappeared, and frightened faces. One officer politely explained that they had received complaints requiring them to investigate. Marcus nodded respectfully. He understood they were simply doing their jobs. His calmness surprised everyone watching, especially Walter, who seemed almost disappointed that chaos had not appeared. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the responding officers looked closely at Marcus and immediately straightened his posture with visible respect. Another quietly whispered to his partner before lowering his head. Confusion spread through the guests as the atmosphere changed in an instant. Marcus gently asked Rachel for one more minute before walking toward the officers. From inside his suit jacket, he carefully removed a leather identification wallet. The moment it opened, every officer standing there immediately saluted. Marcus wasn't simply another groom enjoying his wedding day. He was the newly appointed police chief of the entire city. He had deliberately kept his position quiet throughout the engagement, because he never wanted people to respect him because of his title. He wanted them to know the man before they knew the badge. Only close family members understood why he often worked late nights or disappeared during emergencies. Even Rachel admired that humility. To Marcus, leadership meant serving quietly, not demanding attention. Walter's expression changed completely. Moments earlier, he had watched Marcus with suspicion. Now he stared with disbelief. The same man he had assumed did not belong was the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the city. Yet Marcus did not smile with satisfaction or seek revenge. He simply thanked the responding officers for answering the call professionally and assured them that everything was peaceful. The officers apologized for interrupting the ceremony, but Marcus shook every hand. He reminded them that every complaint deserved a response because protecting the community required fairness. even when the report itself came from unfair motives. His words carried no anger, only dignity. That quiet grace reached hearts far more deeply than shouting ever could. Rachel watched tears fill the eyes of her father. He had worried for years about the challenges an interracial couple might continue facing. Seeing Marcus respond with compassion, instead of humiliation, reminded everyone why Rachel had fallen in love with him. Real strength was not found in power, it was found in restraint. As the patrol cars prepared to leave, Walter slowly stepped off his porch. His confident posture had disappeared. Age suddenly seemed heavier upon his shoulders. He walked toward Marcus with uncertain steps, while every guest watched in silence. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public humiliation. Only an old man carrying decades of assumptions that had finally collided with reality. Walter admitted that he had judged the gathering before knowing anything about the people celebrating. He confessed that fear and prejudice had shaped his decision more than facts. He expected Marcus to reject his apology, perhaps even embarrass him in front of everyone. Instead, Marcus placed a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. He quietly explained that respect earned through fear never lasts, but respect built through forgiveness can change generations. He hoped Walter would remember the wedding, not because police arrived, but because love remained after hatred failed. Those words broke something inside the old neighbor. Tears rolled down his weathered face as he looked around at families of every age, simply wanting to celebrate love. He realized he had almost become the reason children remembered this day with pain instead of joy. Without another word, Walter returned to his house. Many guests assumed he had left out of shame. A few minutes later, he returned carrying several folding tables, coolers filled with bottled water, homemade pies his late wife used to bake from an old family recipe, and every extra chair he owned. Quietly, he spent the rest of the afternoon helping people serve food, refill drinks, and carry decorations. Children who had hidden behind their parents earlier now laughed beside him as he handed out slices of pie with trembling hands. He could not erase what he had done, but he could choose who he became afterward. As evening settled across the neighborhood, music filled the street once again. The flashing police lights had disappeared, replaced by glowing string lights dancing beneath the trees. Guests, who had arrived carrying old wounds, left carrying renewed hope. They had witnessed something rare, not the exposure of prejudice, because sadly that happens too often. They had witnessed forgiveness, refusing to surrender to hatred. Years later, neighbors still remembered that wedding, not because someone called the police on a black couple celebrating their love, but because one groom proved that true authority comes from character, not rank. Marcus could have used his position to punish a man who had wronged him. Instead, he used compassion to rescue another human being from becoming trapped inside his own prejudice forever. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's giving them the chance to become better. Before this story ends, tell us in the comments, if you had been in Marcus's place, would you have forgiven Walter, or would the pain have been too deep to let go? If this story truly touched your heart and reminded you that kindness can change even the hardest hearts, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so more people can experience stories of hope, forgiveness, and second chances.